Hello, dear viewers. It's Ville Kaunisto. I'm the lead designer and technical artist and programmer and many other things of Stardust Galaxy Warriors and Stardust Galaxy Warriors Stellar Climax. And I'm here today to do a postmortem of said game from a, I guess, primary design point of view. Well, it's a side-scrolling space shoot-'em-up game with silly story and like light RPG mechanics. Pretty much, it's pretty much what it is. It's a couch co-op shooter focused on being fun, and it's a weird shoot-'em-up because it's not a shoot-'em-up that is all about like, oh, this is the hardest game ever. It can be a bit difficult at times, but it's a shoot-'em-up which is like, oh, it's really fun to blow things up. That's pretty much what it's arcadey game. It's also our first published game. I guess that's one thing it is. It's also in a way my little baby. It's many things, but primarily those, I guess. It's quite funny. We started it was initially a student project for a game development competition, and we came in second in the competition with that. And then at the same time, we started a studio that was then called Vasara Entertainment to work in a completely different game. And at some point, it turned out that that game was quite ambitious and maybe overly so, or indeed overly so. And then we realized that, hey, we already have this one game that will sort of verify the viability of, like, it came in second in this competition, it kind of works. Why don't we just finish this one? And that's what we did pretty much. And then there's of course a lot of more history there because Vasara Entertainment now only exists under Dreamloop Games, which is because then later down the line we merged with, we joined our forces with Dreamloop, and then, well, the easiest way to do that was to establish it so, for bureaucratic reasons, was to make it so that we have one of the company kind of buys all the shares of the other one with its own shares, so we can all the, you know, Vasara people kind of just became Dreamloop shareholders, and now Dreamloop is the only company that owns Vasara and all that. It's all very dry and bureaucratic, but that's pretty much like, we started students, and then the original Dreamloop guys, I think they started working on another gaming company. We kind of got together. For some weird reason, we tolerated each other, and that sort of blossomed into forming a studio. I think that's the short of it. It was from the get-go, like the core thesis was, and that's a funny thing to say because it was supposed to be a thesis project for a lot of us. And for me as the designer, the topic of my thesis would have been fun, the concept of fun as a design guideline in making a video game. So that was sort of the core of it. And it's such like a broad thing, like it wouldn't seem like a helpful guideline. Like, of course video games are supposed to be fun, but the more you think about it, the more you realize that there's like different types of fun, and there's also mechanics that are not directly fun. So like, because you can have a mechanic where like something is super frustrating, but you will feel really good once you beat that really difficult boss or whatever. But like the act of fighting in itself is not necessarily as fun. Or, you know, you can have a MMO where you want to, you know, you want to grind for something, and once you get that, it's really fun, but the act of doing it is only fun because you anticipate the reward. SCW was like, we want to have as much direct fun as possible in a shooter game. I think really early on I wrote the core philosophy part of the game design doc, and it's really funny because it feels that we changed so many things and we had no idea what we were doing and stuff like that. But back then, when I go back to read those original bullet points of what it was supposed to be about, most of them really still fit. Like, there was, I think the first one was like no gimmicks. That was to say that like you shouldn't have a mechanic to carry your game. Like, it shouldn't be like, oh, you know, you can stop time and that's why it's fun, or you know, you can do whatever. Like, just make it as simple as possible, like as basic as possible, and then make that fun, and then you can add things on top of that. But like, don't have a core level gimmick that you use as a crutch, like, you know, like this is what makes the game fun. The game itself is, the gameplay itself is what makes the game fun. Of course you can have a mechanic like that, and make it fun. But for this specific game, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to be like, how do we make a side-scrolling shooter and just make it really fun? And that's what we did. And then art-wise, like, I guess the other thing was that we wanted to have giant mechs. And I guess ultimately just that giant mechs are fun. Like, that's really what it is. And there's some other like, it just sort of happened. And then art-wise, we had a lot of references to Saturday morning cartoons, like 80s, 90s Saturday morning cartoons, Transformers, of course Gundam, stuff like that. You know, a bunch of stuff. Comic books, like, you know, especially like older cosmic, like space Marvel stuff like that. It was all like sort of... It's really weird, like, these are just things that it somehow felt right to... Like, we were bouncing around ideas, and these were the ones we all liked, and it's sort of just evolved this identity of its own. Like, you couldn't really, like... On hindsight, it simultaneously feel obvious and completely non-obvious that you would do it this way. So it's... But ultimately, I think that would be it. Like, the philosophy was to just make something that's like fun and badass, and also I guess the whole thing that it's like E for everyone rated game. Like, that was another thing we want to try, or I especially as a writer, I want to challenge myself. Like, can I make a game that everybody can enjoy, even from a writing point of view, or even from a rating point of view, that is still not like, doesn't become overly obnoxious. And sort of like also this aversion to overt edginess, which is like, because if you're looking at all this material, like Transformers, Marvel Comics, DC, whatever, all of these have gone through these edgy phases since the... Well, or even when, at the time period that we used for reference. And I kind of want to get away from that. Like, one thing I remember thinking is I want to write this like, as if it's Borderlands 2, but with less like edge. And I would like to say that with less memes, but that doesn't really mean anything at this point, because at this point, if a funny thing annoys somebody, you can just say that stupid meme, I hate this meme game. So I wouldn't maybe say that. But it was pretty much just looking at things we liked and thinking, oh, you know, these could all fit together and it could be something really fun, and then just going from there. It's not really the most deep or philosophical answer, but there is certain magic to it, where like all these pieces somehow just click, and oh, hey, now this works. And something new is born from pieces that by themselves are not really somehow magically original. Like, it falls back to the whole like no gimmicks thing. Like, you shouldn't have any gimmicks creatively either. Like, oh, you know, we have this one specific thing that makes our setting like this, you know, what if, you know. So SCW was kind of like, let's just make a setting without no single defining gimmick, apart from everything needs to be fun, that we fall back on all the time. And it just allowed us to focus on, you know, kind of going gameplay first. But I'm just really rambling here. So, but bottom line is that we just wanted to make a cool and fun game, insofar as we understand those things. Like, of course, it's always going to be subjective. So. Yeah, there were some minor things when going through them. Like, for example, originally we didn't have health bars at all. We wanted to have like these little drones that follow you around, and they were just like, they're green when you can take 3 hits, and yellow when you can take 2, and red, if you're red you will die in 1 hit, and there's no damage or anything. Like, we want to make it as simple as possible. But that made like, it became too shallow, so to speak, and also that it was hard to read. Like, it got to people, what is that color? Why did I die now? So we transitioned to a more, you know, statty system of having health values and stuff like that, and then from there we also had the whole like no grind. Like, in the beginning, that was a really big thing, was like no grind. Nothing must be like, you need to be able to, you know, go to your friend's place and they buy the game or whatever, and you start playing, and need to have everything available. We don't want to have like, oh, you had to play a certain amount to get certain mech or whatever. And that is there, but we did still end up adding like New Game Plus, and we ended up adding the custom upgrades you can buy, and light role-playing mechanics and stuff like that. Like, those did become an element, and I think that was maybe a thing we realized, was that maybe the game could have benefited from doing a little bit more of that, like really building it from the ground up to have the support, the the replayability through New Game Plus, stuff like that. Another philosophy, or another reflection of this same philosophy, was that we had all the little things available from the menu. Like we had the campaign, and then we had separately the gauntlet, which was just like infinite mode, and then we had these challenges that we made that are like specific fun, because we had this like sort of editor for different things, for different parameters. So we made like these predefined challenges with certain circumstances, stuff like that. So that was maybe one like certain mistake that we made. I want to do differently, like to put like so many things in menus, because on hindsight, like people, they just want to play, like they from the menu, they don't want to mess around in the menu, they want to press play game, campaign mode, and then maybe in there you want to do some stuff. So that was maybe one thing. Yeah, it was like there was some assumptions that we could get away with having less content, so to speak, and then we mitigated those. That would be Matthias, our music guy and sound guy. Making that soundtrack was like, it was, even for me, it was really fun. Like my role mostly was just throwing references at Matthias and like thinking, and it had the same thing as all of the design in the game, where it we just fell back on certain things. Like for example, one quite distinct, like, I mean all the tracks are distinct, but for example, if you take the Abyssal Wreck, the underwater level which has the organs, and it's like a little bit like it maybe a little bit stands out as a different track. Like it was originally supposed to be this like abandoned spaceship, which was supposed to have like this horror theme of like candelabras and paintings and stuff like floating in the background and stuff like that. And I remember talking with Matthias that like, think about like silly Dracula, like funky Dracula, like stuff like that. Like how did they portray like that aspect of horror in old games and stuff like that, and like how to make a music to that. And I think the bass line came from because we were working on a mobile version of SGW, and Olli, our other sound guy, he made a track for the like variant of that level in that game, and then Matthias was inspired by that to pick up the bass line, and then we went from there. But there was a lot of stuff like that where we're like, what could Matthias reference from the here or there, and he came up with references by himself and stuff like that, and then then just went to town with it basically. Similarly with like Robot Factory, I remember we're talking about like Terminator, stuff like that, like, and then there's a lot of Mega Man references. Like it was just, I'm not the best person to talk about it because I didn't make it, but from my point of view, it was all about coming up with references, coming up with like themes and like sort of emotions, brands of fun, so to speak. And often we try to find like certain tracks, like, hey, this could fit and this would fit. And I'm quite sure Matthias also came up with a lot of these by himself that he ended up using. So yeah, and from the very early stages we had, like, we wanted to have like we're talking about like a studio length soundtrack, like a proper soundtrack, not just like short loops or whatever. Like every single song should be a actual song with actual structure and like stuff like actual parts, like something you could listen to, not just because it was in a game, but also because it's a good song. Like, I guess that might be a different approach to a lot of games, because often it's like, oh, we're making a retro whatever pixel game, and then we're gonna have a chiptune soundtrack, but then it's gonna be like the songs are only gonna have one part that it loops through or whatever, and or it's gonna be much more dynamic, which I guess also can be really cool. But here we were just like, no, every stage just needs to have a song that could be on an album. That's pretty much how it went down from my point of view, and it is a really good soundtrack. I still listen to it, even though I had to listen to it a lot when I was making the game. But